My mother thought it was nice when he complimented me too much, but only I knew what he did to me. My name is Margareth Louise Carter, and I'm 81 years old today. I'm from Franklin, Tennessee, a small town where everyone knows the name of the neighbor's dog, but no one knows what goes on inside the house next door. Ah, my child, if I'd known the toll that childhood takes on you, I might have run away. But no, I stayed, and I endured. I endured as only a girl who loves her mother can endure. And today, after all this time, I'm telling you this not to bring tears to anyone's eyes, but because there are girls out there experiencing the same thing and thinking it's normal. Do you know what's worse? It started out the way everyone likes to see it. A family with a facade, an absent father, a hard-working mother, and a stepfather who loved his stepdaughter too much. My mother thought it was nice when he complimented me too much, but only I knew why he locked the door when she went to bed. At the time, my mother, Joanne, worked 2 jobs. In the mornings, she cleaned houses, and in the evenings, she worked in the rich people's restaurant. She was so tired that she couldn't see what was in front of her. The first time he came into my room, I thought he was just covering me. That's what he'd say. "Is it cold in here, princess?" With that crooked smile. But the cold, my dear, was inside, and he wasn't covering me. He was weighing me down, and nobody saw it, because he was the good guy of the house. He took us to church, barbecued in the backyard, taught the neighbors' children to ride bicycles. The kind of man every tired woman is grateful to have around. Only at night, when his mother wasn't looking, he would come over. I remember one day, it was my mother's birthday, and he called me over to help prepare the cake. He cut the strawberries and said that I was growing up fast, that my body was becoming too beautiful for my age. I laughed, silly, not knowing what it meant. He would put his hand on my shoulder, let it linger, look at my clothes with that long look. And I thought it was just affection, but it wasn't. It never was. After the party, my mother slept on the sofa, tired, and he came. Of course he came. He came with that voice like he was doing me a favor. "Come here, princess. Let's talk for a minute," and locked the door. And then it was business as usual, those things, which you know well. I learned to pretend it wasn't happening, to stand still, hold my breath, wait for it to pass. Because if I complained, he'd get angry. He'd say I was ungrateful, that it was my fault, that I provoked him. And then he'd give me a present, $1, a colorful notebook, as if he was buying my silence with colored pencils. And I kept quiet. I kept quiet out of fear. I kept quiet out of love. Love for my mother, because she smiled so much when she saw him being affectionate with me. "You're lucky, aren't you, Margie? You have a stepfather who treats you like a daughter," she would say, bloated with fatigue, believing a lie that I was forced to sustain. One day, I tried to tell her. I really tried. It was at school. I was in 4th grade, and the teacher saw me sitting awkwardly, looking like I hadn't slept. She asked if everything was all right at home, and I almost told her. I almost did, but then I thought of her, my mother, everything she was fighting, and I said yes, that it was okay, because if I told him, he might be arrested, and if he went to jail, my mother would suffer, and I thought it was all my fault. That's when the guilt was born, and never went away. And the story, it's only just beginning, my dear, because in that house, everything only got worse. And what he did when the door locked, oh, that hasn't even started yet. If you've made it this far, leave a like, dear. This old lady needs strength to keep going. In the next part, I'll tell you what happened the day he crossed the line, and the school almost found out. I woke up that day with a tightness in my chest that I didn't know where it came from. It was a Saturday. My mother had already left early for her first job, and he was in the kitchen, whistling. It made me angry in a way that even I didn't understand. How can anyone sing after doing what he did? How does he have the nerve to smile? And the worst thing was that he was looking at me with such an air of ownership, as if I had done the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't drink my coffee. I said I was nauseous. He pretended to care, put his hand on my forehead, and said I should rest. But his eyes said something else. I went up to the bedroom and lay there, pretending to sleep. It was the only thing I knew how to do well, but it was no use. The sound of his footsteps coming up the stairs made my skin crawl. My heart felt like a drum inside my chest. He came in without knocking, as he always did. He said he was just going to check on me, to make sure my fever didn't get too high. I sat on the bed, shivering, trying to think of an excuse, but there was no escape. He had already locked the door. I remember everything about that day, the smell of cigarettes on his shirt, his heavy hand on my shoulder, the way he whispered too close. I stayed still, as I had learned to do, because the less I moved, the faster he left. And then, as always, he said, "Don't tell your mother, she wouldn't understand. You know it's just ours." And I, an idiot, nodded my head, because I didn't know what was right or wrong. I just wanted it to end. In the afternoon, my mother arrived and brought me a piece of pie left over from the restaurant. She was excited, saying that maybe she was going to get a permanent job from Monday to Friday. I pretended to smile. My guilt was so tight inside that I could barely swallow my food. And he, sitting on the other side of the table, smiled as if he were the most correct man in the world. He said he was happy for her achievement, that she deserved to rest. And I, silent, pretended not to exist, because if I cried there, she would ask. And if she did, I wouldn't be able to lie. On Monday, something happened that almost changed everything. At school, there was a PE lesson, and I said I couldn't take part. The teacher insisted and asked if it was colic. I said it was, but she didn't believe me. She called me into the corner and asked again, and again, until I started crying. But it wasn't pain, it was despair. She took me into her living room and tried to talk. She asked calmly, said that if anything was happening at home, she could help. I wanted to talk so badly. My throat tingled with the desire to scream. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "Everything's fine." She stared at me for a while, as if she knew, as if she was seeing beyond. She took my hand, squeezed it slowly, and said, "Whenever you want, I'll be here, okay?" And all I could do was nod with my eyes full of water. It was the first time anyone really noticed, but I still went home without saying anything. That night, he was quieter. He didn't speak to me. He didn't even look at me. I got suspicious. I thought he had noticed something. My mother didn't say anything. She carried on as usual, and that drove me crazy. How could she not see? How could she think it was normal for him to hug me tightly, take too long looking at my clothes, call me my princess with that tone? I wanted to shake her, scream, but deep down, I knew she could see it. I just didn't want to see it, because seeing meant acting, and acting was scary. A week passed. He didn't touch me, and then I began to hope. I thought that maybe he had stopped. Maybe the teacher had spoken to someone. Maybe someone had done something. But no, he was just waiting for the house to fall silent again. And it was on a Sunday evening that it all came back. My mother had gone out to buy something at the market. She said she wouldn't be long. He called from his room, said he needed my help to look for a document. I hesitated. He insisted. I went in. And before I even understood, he locked the door. This time it was different. This time he didn't try to be gentle. He didn't speak softly. He just pushed me against the wall and said that I needed to learn to be a woman. I cried. For the first time, I cried in front of him, and he was furious. He said I was ungrateful, that he did everything around the house, and that all I did was work. When my mother arrived, I was sitting on the sofa, my eyes red. She asked if everything was all right, and I said it was a headache. Again, she believed me, or pretended to. I went upstairs to my room, and there, in the dark, I made the most heartbreaking promise of my life. I was going to find a way. I was going to find a way out of there, because if I stayed in that house for another year, I wouldn't survive, neither inside nor out. And it was at that moment that a spark was born. A small thing, but it grew quickly. The idea that maybe, just maybe, someone could get me out of there. But in order to do that, I had to have courage. And courage, in that house, was rarer than peace. The next day, I went to school with the idea fixed in my head. I needed to talk to someone. But courage came and went like the wind. Every step to the gate made me rethink everything. I thought about my mother, her face if she knew. I thought of the neighbors, the church people, everyone saying it was a lie. that he was a good man. I thought about his fear of finding out, because I knew that if he found out, he'd do worse. But I went. I went into the classroom, sat at the last desk, and waited for the right time. The teacher went over the lesson, explained the subject, called them up to the front, one by one. I didn't hear a thing. The noise in the room was distant. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ear. At recess, I went to the coordination office. I said I needed to speak to Mrs. Turner, who was the pedagogue. She was one of those women who spoke softly and looked you in the eye. When she called me in, my legs were shaking so much that I almost turned back. But I sat down. She asked what was going on. She looked at me with a patience that hurt, and I started talking, in bits and pieces, without the courage to say it properly. I said I felt bad at home, that I was afraid of my stepfather, that he did things I didn't understand. She didn't ask what. She didn't insist. She said she was there to listen to me, and that whatever I said was between us. It was the first time I felt safe, not completely, but a little. She asked if she could get someone to talk to me, a social worker from the school. I agreed. And then came the part I wasn't expecting. She asked if she could call my mother. My heart froze. I said no. I asked, almost begged. I said she wasn't supposed to know yet, that if she did, everything would get worse. She stayed silent for a while, then promised to see what she could do. I went back to the living room, shaking. I spent the rest of the day waiting for something to happen. A policeman turning up, my mother being called, the world falling apart, but nothing happened. I went home the same way, scared, but a little firmer, because now someone knew. Only that night, everything exploded. I was in my room pretending to read a book when I heard his footsteps. They were different, heavier. He opened the door with force and walked in, pinning me against the wall. He called me ungrateful, a traitor. He asked me what I'd said at school, who I thought was going to save me. I froze. I couldn't speak. He squeezed my arm so hard that I felt my skin burn. He said that if I opened my mouth again, no one would recognize me. He'd do something worse. And then, out of nowhere, he cried. He cried like a child. He said he loved me, that he did it because I was special, that it was just our connection, that no one understood. I didn't know whether to feel disgusted or sorry. I just wanted to get out of there. He left the room, slamming the door. I sat on the floor, my arm throbbing, not knowing what to do. The next day, I went to school with my sleeve pulled up to the cuff. Mrs. Turner called me again. She said she wanted to visit me at home and talk to my mother. I was so desperate that I cried on the spot. I told her she couldn't, that he would know. She understood. She asked if I could go to a relative's house. I said no. I didn't have anyone, just my mother. And she, poor thing, thought she was living with a saint. That week, things got worse. He became more aggressive. He didn't touch me, but he looked at me with hatred. He watched me. He asked questions all the time. Where I was, who I was talking to, why I was taking so long to shower. My mother started to notice. One night she asked why I was so quiet. I almost told her. But he appeared at the door, and the conversation died there. I started sleeping badly. Any noise made me jump. I even threw up from nervousness before I left for school. Then Mrs. Turner said she would help me write a letter explaining everything. She would keep it, and if anything happened, she would deliver it. That gave me a bit of strength. I wrote everything down, in my own words, but saying enough. I gave it to her and asked her not to do anything yet. I said I'd try to sort it out myself. She didn't agree, but she respected it. I just wanted to protect my mother. The same night, he tried again. He said he was tired of my ice, that I was cold, that I didn't value him. He locked the door and started in with that low, disgusting voice. I pushed. For the first time, I really pushed. Hard. He fell backwards. He stared at me with fury. He said that if I wanted war, I would have it, that I was going to learn. At that moment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I ran away. The next day, I left school early and went to the teacher's house. She let me in. I cried so much that I was breathless. I said I couldn't stand it any longer. If I stayed, I was going to die. She called the social worker and together they began the process. It wasn't easy. Nothing was. There was bureaucracy, fear, and time playing against us. But I was no longer alone. I had an adult woman by my side, and that changed everything. But the hardest part was yet to come. When he found out that I'd gone to school to ask for help, he couldn't stop himself. And from then on, what he did, to this day, I have to close my eyes not to remember it. The first thing that changed was the look on his face. It was no longer that mask of a pretended good guy. It was real anger, dry, without makeup. That morning, I was in the kitchen putting cereal on, trying to act normal, when he came in. He didn't say good morning. He just stood in the doorway looking at me like I was a problem to be eliminated. My mother was in her room getting ready to go out, and I was pretending not to notice. I pretended that I wasn't shaking, that the spoon wasn't hitting the bowl on its own. He approached me slowly and said just that. "I know." And he smiled. It froze me. I couldn't move a muscle. He went to the sink, got a glass, drank some water, and before he left, he muttered, "You'll pay, Margie." Then he slammed the door. When my mother showed up, asking if everything was all right, I told her it was just noise from the street. She believed me, as usual, or pretended to. I couldn't even tell what was blindness and what was cowardice. At school, I told Mrs. Turner. She wanted to go to the council right away, but I still had no proof, just my word. And my word, in that small town, was worth no more than that man's mustache. He was respected. He was liked. He was the man who helped the pastor, who carried bags for the old lady on the corner. I was just a girl who was growing too big for her age. They told me, "You need to stop making things up. Maybe it's your imagination." That's what a social worker said, without even looking me in the eye. I returned home, certain that I was now a target, and it didn't take long. That night, my mother had a migraine and went to bed early. I locked the bedroom door with the chair, but he managed to get in. He threw the door until it gave way. He said I was defying him, that no one was his boss, that women who thought they were too smart needed to learn. He dragged me into the corridor, covered my mouth with his hand, and did what he used to do. But this time it was different. This time with anger, brutality, as if he wanted to erase my existence. When he'd finished, he spat on the floor and said, "Tell me now. Go to school and tell me. I want to see who believes you." I spent the whole night on the bathroom floor, trying to find a way to disappear. My arm hurt, my leg hurt, but what hurt most was the feeling of being nothing. The next day, I didn't even go to school. I stayed locked in my room, listening to my mother calling at the door and pretending to be sick. She left soup on the doorstep and went out. And there I was, without the courage to look in the mirror, because seeing my face was a reminder of everything I couldn't stop. On the third day, Mrs. Turner came home. My mother didn't understand a thing. She opened the door suspiciously. The teacher asked to speak to me. She went up to my room. When she saw me, she understood instantly. She hugged me without saying anything. She stayed there for a while, then helped me pack a backpack. She said she was going to get me out of there, even if she had to. We went down together. My mother asked where we were going. The teacher looked at her sternly and replied, "That girl needs looking after. You know that." And then, for the first time, my mother cried. We went to her house. I spent a few days there. I told her everything, detail by detail. It was hard, but I told her. The school recorded the report. They called in official assistants. They started an investigation. He was called to testify. He denied everything. He said I was disturbed, that I wanted attention, that I was jealous of his relationship with my mother. He made up stories, cried in front of the judge, swore he treated me like his daughter. And the worst thing? A lot of people believed him. My mother stood in the way. She didn't say anything. She disappeared. She didn't come to visit me. She didn't answer the calls from school, and I understood. She chose to pretend, because facing the truth was more painful than maintaining the lie. At the hearing, I sat in front of everyone and spoke, not in anger, with pain, with truth. But justice is not moved by pain. With no physical evidence, no witnesses, they dismissed me. They said I needed therapy, that it was better to move on. And what about him? He went home. He went back to his normal life, as if nothing had happened, as if I were some spoiled teenager's invention. Mrs. Turner helped me get shelter with a temporary family. They weren't bad. They had children, nice people, but I felt strange. I was ashamed to eat, afraid to speak out loud, terrified of sleeping with the door open. The nights were long. I wrote down everything I could remember in old notebooks, trying to understand where I had lost my childhood, because I was 13, but inside I looked like a tired old woman. After 2 months, they sent me a letter saying I could come home if I wanted to. They said that as there was no official confirmation, custody would remain with my mother. I tore up the letter. I wasn't going back. Not for her, not for anyone. I started working with Mrs. Turner part-time. She let me organize books, do paperwork. She treated me like people. It was she who said, "You're still going to tell this story, and it's going to hurt, but it's also going to heal." I didn't believe her. How could telling it help? But now, talking to you, maybe I understand. Maybe it will help another girl realize that it's not her fault, that it's always the one who locks the door who's wrong. But what I haven't told you yet is what happened after he went back to the street like it was nothing. Because one day, he found me again. And then, my dear, that's when I decided I was going to turn the pain inside out. After he went back to his life as if nothing had happened, I thought I'd never see that face in front of me again. But the world likes to test those who are already broken. I was already living with another family, trying to sort out the loose ends in my head, studying in the afternoon to avoid bumping into former classmates who repeated gossip like it was news. It was hard, but at least I had a little peace. A little. Until that day. It was the end of November, almost Christmas. I went out to buy art materials for a school activity. I was distracted, with the list in my hand, not really looking around. It was crossing the 2nd Street after the pharmacy that I smelled it. A smell that the body recognizes before the mind. A mixture of cheap cigarettes and disinfectant. I looked away, and there he was, on the bench in the square, as if he were just another man enjoying the evening. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, his legs crossed, and the same cynical look as always. Our eyes met. He smiled. A slow, debauched smile, like someone saying, "I found you." I froze. The list fell out of my hand. My legs stiffened, but I managed to walk. I didn't run. I just walked away, as if the ground was crumbling with every step. I got home, locked myself in my room, and cried quietly. I didn't tell anyone, not even the family who had taken me in. I thought that if I kept quiet, he would disappear, that it was just a coincidence. But the next day, he showed up again, near the school, leaning against his car, like he was waiting for someone. I drove past quickly, head down, pretending I didn't see him. He didn't even have to speak. He just pointed at his own head and waved his finger in his mouth. I almost threw up right there. The principal noticed that I was different. She called me into the classroom and asked if anything had happened. I denied it, again. But inside, anger began to grow. A kind of silent rage, which starts small and grows in size, like water filling a pan on the fire. I was no longer the girl who kept quiet to protect others. Now I had to protect myself, and no one was going to do that for me. I had to stand up for myself. The following week, he followed me to the supermarket. He didn't say a word. He just stood in the same aisle. He picked up the same packet of cookies, put them in his trolley, and walked slowly past me. The employee saw. She looked at me scared. I dropped everything and left. That was the last time I pretended it was going to go away by itself. I got home and told her. For the first time, I told it without crying. I recounted every encounter, every gesture. The woman who looked after me nearly broke the table in anger. She called the school, then the police. This time, it wasn't just notes in a notebook. They filed a report and opened a new case. But he was clever. He knew where to go, how to hide. He never made direct contact. He never gave a clear reason. It was harassment, yes, but difficult to prove. Justice, as always, wanted blood to act. That's when I had the idea. I don't know where I got it from. Maybe from the movies I watched in the living room. Maybe from writing in a hidden diary. I borrowed a cell phone and started filming. Short videos. Him standing on the corner. Him following me down the street. him peeking through the school window. Nothing explicit, but constant. When I showed the material to the social worker, she paled. She said that now something could be done, that with the images, the process would gain strength. And it did. A request for a protective order was filed. The courts, slow as ever, only moved after pressure, but it authorized it. He couldn't come near me. No talking, no looking. If he did, he'd be arrested. Of course, I knew that wouldn't stop anything. Order on paper doesn't ensure evil. But for the first time, I felt that he was afraid, because when he saw me walking past with my cell phone in my hand, he turned his face away. Because when he received the summons, he disappeared for a few days. Because when the police went to my mother's house to ask for him, he cried like a child, saying he was a victim. My mother, she appeared in this story again. She called crying, asking me to stop this. She said I was going to destroy her life, that he was her husband, that without him she was nothing. I listened to everything in silence. Then I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just understood that some mothers choose to close their eyes until the end, and that it wasn't my fault. With the measure in place, the city was divided. Half said I was brave, the other half called me a liar. But I carried on, head held high, back to studying, working, and smiling. Slowly, like putting a house back together after a hurricane. But inside, something had changed. I was no longer a hostage to silence. And that, my dear, is priceless. But he was still loose. He was still living his life. I still had to look over my shoulder every time I turned a corner, because fear doesn't disappear overnight. But what nobody expected was that, years later, he would dig his own grave, because a man like that doesn't change. He just changes his target. And when justice doesn't work for you, fate does. Life slowly got back on track. I was already 16 when I was finally able to breathe without thinking about his next move. The protective order was still in place. He no longer showed up at school or in the neighborhood. But inside me, the vigilance never went on vacation. It was as if a part of me had been alert forever, ready to run even if there was no visible threat. I still lived with the same family that had taken me in, and even though they didn't hug me or care for me, they treated me with respect. And that alone was more than I knew. It was enough for me to start planning my own path. I started working in a small grocery store near the highway. I was a cashier, organizing shelves, doing whatever anyone asked. I wanted to get some money together and get out of that town, to go somewhere else, where no one knew me, where my name hadn't been dragged along the sidewalks by so much judgment. But it was difficult. Every dollar that came in went out quickly. Food, clothes, books. Life for those with little is made up of hard choices, and I was used to that. What kept me going was the idea that at some point, things would turn around, and they did, but not in the way I'd hoped. It was on a muggy afternoon, while I was going through Miriam's products, that I heard two men talking near the ice cream freezer. They spoke quietly, but I heard them. They said that a Richard had been fired from the technical school for inappropriate behavior. At that moment, my body froze. Richard, it was him, the same guy who hid behind a marriage, a church, an entire community that swore he was an example. Now, once again, the pattern was repeating itself. New school, new girl, new hushed-up scandal. I stood there with the barcode in my hand, unable to process it. When I could breathe again, I went to the back of the market, said I needed a minute. I leaned against the wall and started shaking. It wasn't anger, it was something else. It was the certainty that everything I'd experienced wasn't isolated. It was part of a cycle. It didn't stop. It just changed the target. And now, another girl might be going through what I went through. The next day, I followed up. I called the former coordinator of the technical school. I said I was a former student and wanted to know about vacancies. She was polite, but closed. She didn't say anything. But there, in that cold call, I knew something had happened, and they weren't going to talk, because nobody likes to expose things like that. They hurt the reputation of the school, the town, the good people. I went back to writing. I took out the old notebooks and put everything together, every page written in the dark, every memory I'd kept in fear. I began to put together a story with dates, places, and names. I was tired of depending on others to do what was right. If justice couldn't protect, I was going to serve as a warning, a beacon, because if I didn't shout, who else would? I created a profile under another name on a social network at the time. I posted excerpts of what I wrote, without my photo, without my face. But the locals understood quickly. Messages started coming in, some in support, saying that they knew, that they were suspicious, that they had seen things and never told. Others, of course, were full of hate. People saying I was a liar, that I was trying to make a name for myself, that I was destroying a family. But what surprised me was what came next. 3 girls sent me messages saying they'd been through something similar. Not with me, with him, each at a different time. One was his neighbor's niece. Another, the daughter of a friend from church. The third, a 12-year-old girl who was still trying to understand what she was feeling. I read each message with trembling hands, because there was living proof of the pattern. It wasn't an invention. It never was. It was an old script, repeated and ignored. I showed it all to Mrs. Turner. She was retired, but still had contact with the school staff. When she read it, she didn't say a word. She just took a deep breath and called a lawyer, a young, firm woman, the kind who doesn't back down. In no time at all, we had all the reports together. We presented everything to the new county prosecutor, and for the first time, things moved forward. He was summoned. He was heard. He had to face what he had always managed to hide. This time, there was no escape. There were witnesses. There was a pattern. There were people willing to fight. What about him? He tried to deny it. He tried to cry. He tried to say he was being persecuted, but his face no longer fooled anyone. The small town couldn't pretend anymore, and when he was taken into custody, I sat on the living room floor and cried like a child, but not from pain, of relief. But this story isn't over yet, my dear, because while he was in prison awaiting trial, my mother showed up again with a letter, and what she wrote there was what tore away the little bit of the past that I still held dear. When the woman from the house where I lived came into the room with that envelope in her hand, I knew right away that it was from my mother. I recognized the handwriting even though I couldn't see it properly. Those crooked scribbles, full of unnecessary twists and turns, looked like me, trying to be beautiful, but too bruised to get the line right. She hadn't heard from me for months. From the day I signed the protective order papers, she never called. So receiving a letter now, right in the middle of everything, was no coincidence. It was a strategy. It took me 2 days to open it. I left the envelope on the table, looked at it several times, but didn't touch it. I was afraid of what was inside, because my mother knew how to hurt without raising her voice. She knew how to choose words that cut from the inside out. On the 3rd day, I sat alone, turned on the lamp, and tore out the paper. 3 pages, written in blue pen, with the smell of cheap perfume. It began with a "my daughter" that made me sick to my stomach. How can someone address you with such affection after denying their pain for so long? She said she'd heard he'd been arrested, that she was devastated. She never imagined he was capable of all that she felt betrayed. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. She cried for the man who cheated on her, not for her daughter who begged for help and didn't get it. She said she prayed every day for God to mend her heart, and at the end of the 1st page she wrote, "I hope that one day you'll be able to forgive me for not realizing anything." It was then that I understood. She hadn't changed. She wasn't sorry. She just wanted to come out clean, to pass as a victim too. And I, who had screamed for years without being heard, was now just an uncomfortable memory that she needed to shape into something less ugly. On the 2nd sheet, she tried to justify herself. She said he was good at first, that he looked after me like a father, that he took me to school, made me lunch, bought me presents, as if that cancelled out everything else, as if that paid for what he did when the door locked. On the last page, he made his final request. He wanted to see me, to talk, face to face. He said he was sick, that he missed me, that he missed the sweet daughter I was. I almost tore the paper at that moment, because the sweet daughter I was died right there, in that corridor where he dragged me for the first time. She died, and nobody looked. Nobody cried. No one asked where she had ended up. I kept the letter without replying. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because everything that needed to be said, I had already shouted inside 1,000 times. She knew. She had always known. Her silence wasn't ignorance. It was a choice, and choices are expensive. At school, the news spread. His arrest could no longer be hidden. The girls started talking, each with their own piece of the story. Some only suspected it, others had lived it. We put it all together in a dossier that read like a tragic novel. The authorities began to take real action, new testimonies, new accusations, and his name fell from the murals of good deeds to the headlines of scandal. It was only the beginning. I received threats, an anonymous letter in the school locker, people saying I should have kept quiet, that I'd ruined the life of a good man. But I wasn't shaking anymore. I read it and threw it away, because now they were the ones who were afraid of losing what supported the lie. In court, he tried to appeal. He said he was sick, that he needed treatment, not punishment. But the judge read every statement, every line, and at the end, he looked at me. He asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and said just this. Everything he did while you weren't looking. Now that you're looking, he wants to look sick, but I'm the one who got sick. And to this day, no one has given me any medicine. It was the only time the whole room was silent because of me. I left without looking back. I didn't stay to hear the sentence. I knew it wouldn't be fair enough, because nothing gives back lost time. Nothing fixes what it broke. But at least, for a while, he would stay away from any girl. And that, my goodness, was a victory. A few days later, I received another letter from my mother. I didn't even open it. I burned it, because you have to learn to choose what you let in. And there are words that, when they get in, contaminate everything. I had already cleaned my chest too much to get it dirty again. At 18, I got a scholarship to study abroad. Another state, another life. I packed my bags with a heavy heart, but with a peaceful soul. Before I left, I went to the school garden where Mrs. Turner met me for the first time. I sat there and cried, not from pain, but goodbye, of the girl I was, of the woman who was beginning to be born. But even in another city, in another world, the story wouldn't leave me, because one day, without warning, someone knocked on my sorority door, a small girl with a quiet voice, and it all started again. That afternoon, I had just finished washing the dishes. I had a class coming up, and I still needed to revise a presentation. The routine was finally starting to take on a rhythm that I could handle without fear. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. I could look people in the eye without thinking they were about to hurt me. It was a beginning, painful, slow, but a start. When the doorbell rang, I had no idea. I opened the door, expecting a classmate, maybe a neighbor, anything normal. But no, it was a girl. She must have been 12 at the most, skinny, her hair tied up in any way, her backpack on her shoulder. She looked at me with a firmness that didn't match her age. She called me by my full name. It wasn't a common name. Then I froze. I asked who had sent her there. She said she'd found my address in an old letter. She said she was Professor Turner's daughter. At that moment, my legs went limp, because that woman was part of everything I'd managed to rebuild. She was the one who had held my hand when no one else wanted to, and now her daughter was on my doorstep. I invited her in. I offered her water, juice, anything that would make me feel in control. She refused everything. She said she just needed to show me something. She took an envelope out of her bag and put it on the table. It was a letter, written by her mother before she died. The teacher had had cancer. She found out late. She fought for a year, but couldn't resist. And before she left instructions for her daughter. One of them was to give me that envelope, and only when she was old enough to understand the contents. I read it all in silence. There were 3 pages. The handwriting was still firm, but there was a tremor at the end. She said she had never forgotten my story, that she admired me for not falling apart, that she regretted not having done more. And in the end, she said that her daughter, The little girl, who was now looking at me with steady eyes, was going through something similar, and that if anyone could understand, it was me. I didn't know what to do. The world was spinning. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. She held my hand. She said she didn't want to tell anyone yet. I just wanted to talk to someone who wasn't an adult speaking in a pitying voice, someone who knew what it was like to feel that the world didn't have your back. I spent the afternoon with her, listening. Every word came out with pain, because it was like listening to myself years before. The same doubts, the same fear, the same guilt. She said that her stepfather started with compliments, then gifts, then night visits. Her mother, of course, said it was just affection, that he was trying to create a bond, and she, like me one day, thought it was true, until she realized it wasn't, but it was too late. And the body, that small body, had already learned to hide even from itself. At the end of the story, she asked me what I did, how I escaped, and I, with my eyes watering, said that I didn't escape, that I survived, and that I was still trying to understand how to really live afterwards. But I was there, and that now she wasn't alone either. Over the next few days, I began to help her in any way I could. I talked to the school's social services. I organized meetings with a therapist. The girl resisted. She was afraid of everything. But little by little, she gave in. She talked more. She walked with less weight. She still didn't smile much, but she no longer put her head down, and that was a miracle. Things moved on. The complaint was made. The trial began. And the stepfather, of course, denied everything. He said it was a fabrication, that the girl was rebellious, that the mother was being manipulated. Everything was the same. The words, the gestures, the arguments. It was like watching an old play being staged again. Only now, I was on the other side of the stage. The girl's mother took a long time to believe it. She screamed, accused, cried, then she fell silent, and finally, she understood. When the evidence started to come to light, she couldn't pretend, and that hurt, because it reminded me of my own mother, the difference between having someone who goes back and someone who chooses to remain blind. Over time, the girl gained strength. She changed schools. She started taking drawing classes. She kept scribbling in her notebook. One day, she showed me a drawing of me. I said it was how she saw me, strong, with eyes that saw everything. I cried in hiding, because I never saw myself like that. But maybe, just maybe, I really was. Along the way, I discovered that there were others, other girls, other stories. One of them was my sorority friend's cousin, another, the neighbor of a college friend. The world was full of hidden little pains, and I started writing about it, without my name, without my face, just the words, and people started reading, sending messages, counting. I had become what I never had, a safe place, and that hurt and healed at the same time. But one day, in the middle of all this rebuilding mess, news arrived that I never expected. Richard had died of a heart attack in the bath, alone. Nobody found him in time. It was his mother, days later, who smelled something strange and called the police. And do you know what I smelled? Nothing. No relief, no anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness. Because he would never really pay. He would never understand what he had done. I was never going to hear from all of us what had happened. But there, in that silence, I realized that life takes its toll. It may take a while, but it does. And when I threw away the last papers I still had with his name on them, I felt that the heaviest part was finally gone. But there's still something missing from this story. Something I've never told anyone. Not even to you. But maybe now I'll have the courage. I've never talked about it. Not in therapy sessions, not in the papers I wrote, not even to the girls who saw me as a kind of mirror. I was ashamed. The kind that doesn't have a name, but sticks to your skin like wet dust. But time passes and pulls everything up. What isn't said rots inside, and I got tired of carrying around what wasn't mine. So today, now, I'm going to tell you. I don't know if you'll understand, but I'll try my best. It was the summer after he was arrested for the second time, when everything was out in the open, when people began to look at me with less crooked eyes. I was already living on my own. I worked in a small office and went to college at night. The The girl who came to my door was still in the process, with follow-up. Things had apparently settled down, but inside, I was broken in a way that nobody could see. I walked one way, ate another, breathed differently. The world treated me as a survivor, but I only felt absent. And it was in this empty space that what I never thought would happen, happened. I met a guy at work, quiet, polite, the kind who speaks with his eyes. We started chatting by chance, near the coffee machine. He'd ask if I wanted sugar. I'd say no. We laughed about nonsense. That was all. One day he offered me a lift because it was raining. I refused. The other day, he brought me a piece of cake that his mother had baked. I thanked him without knowing how to react. I wasn't used to kindness without being asked. I no longer understood what it meant to be seen with respect. I was afraid, very afraid, but I accepted the gestures, little by little, like someone stepping on ground that could give way at any moment. Until one evening, after class, he was waiting for me at the exit with a book in his hand. I thought you'd like it. It was just any old novel, but with a dedication inside, handwritten, my name, and a short sentence. Some stories deserve a fresh start. It took me apart. We started going out. Nothing much. A movie, ice cream, a chat on a bench in the square. I was tense, thinking that at any moment he would want something in return. But he didn't ask for anything. He just listened. He never pushed. He never insisted. And because of that, precisely because of that, I began to feel something that I thought was dead. Desire. Affection? Fear, too. But along with it, something new. Curiosity. What would it be like to love without guilt? I spent months in this confusion. One day I wanted to kiss. The next I wanted to disappear. I had nightmares just thinking about lying next to someone. But he waited. He said he just wanted to be there. And then came the night when I gave in. Not out of obligation. Because I wanted to. For the first time. By choice. I was shaking from my toes to my neck. I cried without understanding why. He hugged me slowly and said it was okay, that I should take my time. But what nobody tells you is that the body remembers, that the skin, even with affection, reacts with fright. That touch, even when it's good, can hurt if it was only pain before. I retreated. I didn't look him in the face for days. I felt dirty again. I felt like I was betraying myself. But he didn't disappear. He texted me on the third day. I'm here. I started talking again, calmly. And there I realized that it wasn't him who was wrong. It was me who still needed time. I was still carrying the smell of the locked room, even though I was 1,000 kilometers away. And that's when it hit me. I had never allowed myself to be a woman. I'd only ever been an object. I was only a used body. I was never my own choice. And now, with everything in my favor, I still didn't know how to do it, how to feel, how to exist. I told him, in pieces, without details. He cried, not out of pity, anger. He said he wanted to beat up all the men who had done this to me, but he couldn't go back in time. He could only stay if I let him. I did. Not all of it, but a little, enough to get started. And little by little, without rushing, he showed me that I still could, that the touch could be light, that kissing could be an invitation, not an obligation, that sleeping next to someone didn't have to be a vigil. It was a scare a night, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. But it was a journey. One night I woke up sweating, crying, not knowing where I was. He just covered me up and stayed there. He didn't ask. He didn't push. He just stayed. And I realized that maybe that was it. That maybe the cure isn't forgetting. It's being able to remember without collapsing. I stayed with him for 2 years, until he had to move out of state because of his family. He asked me to go with him. I refused, not for lack of feeling, but because I understood that the journey was now mine, that what he gave me was what no one else ever could. Proof that I could love without losing myself. And you know what's strangest? I never saw him again. There was no friendship, no messages, no photo on his birthday. It was as if he'd come just to do that bit, and he left, and everything was fine. After that, I never had another relationship, not because of trauma, but because I didn't need to. I had found what was missing, dignity, the one they took from me when they said I was theirs. Now I was mine. I'd been through so much, told almost everything, helped other girls, healed myself of so much rottenness that they'd left inside me that I didn't think I had anything left to hide, but there was. A hole that I dug myself and covered with fine earth, so thin that all it took was a windstorm to show that it was still there. And that's exactly what happened. A wind from the past, which came in the form of a crumpled envelope left under my apartment door. It was a letter. There was no sender, just my name written in a handwriting I hadn't seen for decades. When I took it in my hand, my whole body recognized it. It wasn't from my mother or from Richard. It was from the hospital, a hospital in another state, where I spent a few months after everything exploded. I was 17 at the time, too thin, with no appetite, pain in every corner, and unable to sleep more than 2 hours a night. I was admitted to a psychiatric center with a diagnosis of nervous breakdown, and after weeks of observation, they sent me to a calmer clinic, one of those that claim to help the soul. I stayed there for 3 months, and in there, something happened that I kept hidden even from myself. In my second week there, I found out I was pregnant. Yes, pregnant. Of him, Richard's. I don't even know how it happened. I mean, I do. But what I mean is that I didn't realize it before. I thought the nausea was from the bad food at the center, that the delay was because of stress. But it wasn't. It was one body trying to create another within the chaos. When the doctor told me, I fainted. Literally. I woke up with 2 nurses next to me, an IV in my arm and my head throbbing. I spent the next few days like a zombie. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I couldn't feel anything because there was a new weight inside me, a small, defenseless being who hadn't asked to be born from something so dirty. And I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't even look at my belly. I felt invaded again, in a way that not even the heaviest memories could explain. I told the psychologist. She was calm, gentle, and told me that I had choices. She talked about adoption, legal interruption, special foster care, but it all sounded like noise. I just wanted it to end. And in a moment of desperation, I asked her to erase everything. I said I didn't want to go through with it, that I couldn't look into the eyes of a child born of what was destroying me, and so it was done. I signed the papers. I went through the tests. I underwent the procedure, and then I was silent for weeks. Nobody knew. Nobody outside that clinic. Not Mrs. Turner, not the family who took me in, not the school. It was a secret that I hid so tightly that even my body seemed to forget. I came back to life as if it had never happened, but inside, I knew. I carried the guilt like an open scar, even though I knew I had no choice, even though I understood that it was the right decision. I felt that some part of me had died again in that cold, white room where they took from me what I never wanted to carry. And now, so many years later, that envelope brought it all back. Inside, as well as a copy of the documents, there was a letter from the nurse who had accompanied me. Her name was Rachel. I remembered her face. Clear eyes, a low voice, a way of knowing that there's no point in talking much to people who no longer hear anything inside. She wrote saying that she had never forgotten me, that she saw me leave the hospital with my shoulders hunched as if I were carrying the world, that she prayed that I would be able to get my life back together. And now, with her retirement, she decided to look up some of the names that had passed through there, and mine was one of the ones she couldn't erase from her memory. I closed the letter slowly. I sat on the kitchen floor with everything on my lap, and there, I cried for the first time for that child, not of regret, but of mourning, because even without wanting to, even without planning to, it was a life that existed for weeks inside me, a life that didn't have a chance, that was snatched away out of necessity, but it deserved at least to be remembered, if only once. I lit a candle that night. I'm not religious, but I thought it was only fair. I sat in silence for a while, just watching the flame dance, and I said quietly, "Forgive me. I just tried to survive." And for the first time, I felt that someone, somewhere, had listened. Since then, I've never hidden it. I kept the papers in an envelope with my name on it. I put it in a box, along with the old notebooks, The girl's drawings and the letter from the teacher. It's my box of truth. If one day I die and someone opens it, they'll understand everything. They'll know where this woman who seems strong today, but who was once just fear in the form of people, came from. I never thought I'd see him again. Not Richard, of course. That was already buried, and with him everything that could drag me back. But the boy from the past, the one who gave me the book with the dedication, who stood by me in the worst silences, who taught me that affection doesn't have to hurt, that one I thought had disappeared forever. And then, one late afternoon, with the sky overcast and my thoughts far away, he appeared. I went into a new coffee shop that had opened near the college where I now teach. I sat down with my pile of exam papers to correct, ordered a black coffee, and when I looked up to pick up the sugar, there he was, the same calm expression, hair with more grey strands, a steady gaze. He smiled as if time had only been a pause, not a lifetime. He stopped in front of my table and asked if he could sit down. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded in my chest like old times. Not out of fear, out of memory. I nodded in agreement. He pulled up a chair, took off his coat, and said he didn't think he'd ever see me again. He said he thought about me sometimes, especially when he read something beautiful, that he still had the note I'd left inside a book I'd lent him before we said goodbye. I didn't even remember that note anymore. He said that he'd started again in another city, that he'd tried other loves, but none had stayed, and that, on his way back to visit his sister who lived there, he decided to have a coffee, and there I was. We chatted like old acquaintances. We caught up on life in short sentences, skipping the bits that hurt. But he didn't ask about anything else, until he looked at me deeply, as he always did, and said that he knew I still had stories that nobody knew about, and if one day I wanted to tell them, he would be there. It didn't have to be now, or tomorrow, but that I deserved to know. I didn't reply. He got up, left the new number written on a napkin, and left with a "see you." I put the paper in my bag and went home with my head boiling, because no matter how far life has come, there are questions that remain on the doorstep, waiting for the right time to come in. I didn't sleep properly for 3 days, until I sat down and wrote a long letter. I explained what I'd never had the courage to say. I talked about the pregnancy, the clinic, the guilt. I told how the body carries everything even when the mind tries to erase it. I told how he saved me without realizing it, and that's why I stayed away, because I didn't know how to deal with something good after so much garbage. I folded the letter, put it in a simple envelope, went to his sister's house, and asked her to deliver it. 2 days later, he called. The voice on the other end of the line didn't come with shock or pity. It came with respect. He said he'd read everything, that he'd cried in silence, that he understood, and that nothing I said would change what he thought of me. It only increased it, and that, if it still fit, he wanted to start again. Not from where we left off, but from where I was now. We met again. It wasn't a movie. There was no soft music in the background. It was coffee in the old mug in my kitchen, conversation on the carpet, and a look that said, "We're here, even after everything." And there I understood that not all pain becomes an ugly scar. Some just remind us where we came from, so that we never forget how far we've come. Today, life is different. I teach girls who look at me as if I know all the answers. Little do they know that I've only learned to ask good questions. I continue to write. Sometimes I help women who have been through the same thing. Sometimes I just listen, because there are times when listening saves more than talking. I never wanted fame or a stage. I just wanted peace. And I think I've finally found it. I'm not going to say I've forgotten everything. You can't forget. But I've learned to live with the memory without letting it boss me around. And that, my dear, is freedom. The real thing. The kind that doesn't depend on bars or judges, just on courage. So that's it. If you've listened to me this far, thank you. Every word you've read has been a piece of the girl I was. And if one day you come across a girl looking lost, hug her with your eyes. Because sometimes all someone needs is to know that they're not alone. And now I'm finished, but not like someone saying goodbye. I end as someone who can finally breathe without guilt. Because for the first time in my life, I was the one who chose the words, and no one can take that away from me.